I'm Lieutenant Bob Steff, Commander of the Major Investigations Section for the Aurora Police Department. Part of our duties is registering and monitoring approximately 600 registered sex offenders residing in the city of Aurora. In a few moments, you're going to receive information about the registration process, and you're going to learn valuable information about the individual who is currently registered in the city of Aurora, in your community, and has been determined to be a sexually violent predator. Sex offender legislation began in 1994 with the passage of the Jacob Wetterling Act. This act required states to register sex offenders. In 1996, Megan's Law was passed, which gave the public access to the sex offender registry in their community. Also in 1996, the Pam Lichner Act was passed. This act mandated lifetime registration for some offenders and established a national registry. In 2006, the Adam Walsh Child Safety Act was passed. This act set uniform standards within all states. Offenders are required to register with the law enforcement agency in the community where they live under the following circumstances. If they were convicted or were released from the Department of Corrections for a sexual offense against a child on or after July 1st, 1991, if they were convicted in Colorado or another state or were released from the Department of Corrections for any sexual offense on or after July 1st, 1994, registration in Colorado is required for both adults and juveniles who have been convicted of a sexual offense. Some convictions allow the offender to petition the courts to discontinue the registration process after a specific time, and most of the serious offenses require lifetime registration. Any sex offender convicted of a sex offense must register with their local law enforcement agency. The basic registration requirements are: offenders must register at a designated frequency, either annually or quarterly, depending on the severity of the crime they were convicted of committing. Offenders must report changes in their home address within 5 days and also must report any changes in their name within 5 days. While our first priority is to bring offenders into compliance, violations of these basic requirements constitute a separate offense and may result in prosecution. Please note that mere designation as a sex offender does not limit the person where they can live, work, or visit. In Colorado, local law enforcement agencies are required to notify the community of any registered sex offender living in the community. This process is accomplished by two means of communication. The first is through passive and ongoing means through the sex offender registration process. The community can obtain a copy of the sex offender registration list from their local law enforcement agency or look at the agency's website if a website exists. The second is what we call active notification. This active notification is accomplished by conducting a community meeting for those sex offenders who have been designated by the courts to be a sexually violent predator. There are approximately 10,000 registered sex offenders in Colorado. Approximately 65% of the convicted sex offenders are placed on probation. The remainder is either sentenced to prison terms with the Department of Corrections or sent to community corrections. Sexual offenders who are convicted of one type of offense may be later determined by the courts to be a high risk of committing a different or more severe type of sexual offense when released from prison. The crime in which the offender is convicted is only one indicator of risk to the community, and these offenders may be classified as a sexually violent predator. Each of you in our community has a vested interest in helping each offender be successfully managed. Sex offenders need housing and employment just like you and me. They have a right to live in the community and be free from harassment and vigilantism. Harassment is counterproductive to the goals of the community management and may cause the offender to go underground and hide. Any citizen who uses this information to harass, threaten, or intimidate any offender will be subject to criminal prosecution. Victims of sexual assault may exhibit many different responses, such as crying, anger, being withdrawn, and may be unusually quiet. Victims who are assaulted by someone they know may experience a much longer and more difficult recovery period. Many victims will develop post-traumatic stress disorders and may experience long-term effects to include depression, anxiety, eating disorders, flashbacks, divorce, loss of sexual interest, loss of concentration, sleeping disorders, and suicide. Male victims tend to develop antisocial behaviors, and females tend to experience depression issues. There is no typical sex offender. However, most offenders are male, and all tend to be deceptive, manipulative, and secretive. Most sex offenders engage in crossover behavior, and many have no criminal history at all. 78 to 90% of sex offenses are committed by someone known to the victim. Sexual deviancy usually begins in mid to late adolescence, and sex offenses are not usually impulsive. They are usually carefully planned. The criteria for a registered sex offender to be classified as a sexually violent predator in Colorado is: the sex offender must be convicted as an adult on or after July 1st, 1999. The crime of sexual assault, unlawful sexual contact, and sexual assault on a child must have occurred on or after July 1st of 1997. This includes attempts, solicitations, and conspiracies. The victim must be a stranger to the offender or must be a person with whom the offender cultivated a relationship primarily for the purpose of sexual victimization. The offender is determined to be a risk to the community through a process which includes risk assessment administered by trained professionals, including psychological testing or prior convictions. The classification as a sexually violent predator in Colorado is determined by the courts if the offender was designated as a sexually violent predator in another state prior to moving to Colorado. He or she will be designated as an SVP in Colorado. The Colorado legislature determined that sexually violent predators, by definition, pose a higher risk to the community at large and therefore mandated that upon their release from prison, the community must be notified. A sexually violent predator is more likely to reoffend in the first year upon release from prison. All sexually violent predators must register and have their addresses physically checked 4 times a year. Sexually violent predators do not represent all dangerous sex offenders. The community notification process and sex offender registration are not a complete deterrent to sexual assault. Please remember that vigilantism, harassment, threats, or intimidation of an offender is counterproductive to the best interest and safety of the community. We want the offenders to be registered and visible in the community and not hide underground. Harassments, threats, intimidation, or vigilantism is criminal and will be investigated and prosecuted. Remember, informed communities are safer communities. For additional information, please visit the following websites for internet posting of registered sex offenders: www.aurorapolice.com or www.sor.state.co.us. Please stand by. In a moment, you are going to hear about a sexually violent predator that has recently moved into your neighborhood.
The Aurora Police Department has a new sexually violent predator, Adam Wayne Connor, date of birth 8/8 of 86. He's a white male, 5'6", 240 pounds, brown hair, green eyes. Connor's current address, 1637 Dallas Street, apartment 102. Connor must register with the Aurora Police Department Sex Crimes Unit quarterly, lifetime. His residence must be verified quarterly by the Sex Crimes Unit. Connor's criminal history: November 10th, 2008, sexual assault on a child attempt. Also, assault 2, caused serious bodily injury. January 26, 2007, telephone obstruct service, DV. Connor was determined to be an SVP because he was 20 years old at the time of the incident. The crime was committed in 2006. The conviction was for sexual assault on a child attempt. The victim was known to Connor. Connor met the criteria of a sexual violent predator on an SVP risk assessment and was determined by the court to be an SVP. Connor is currently on parole. Schools within 1 mile of 1637 Dallas Street: Boston Elementary, Crawford Elementary, Fulton Academy of Excellence, Logan School for Creative Learning, West Middle School, Aurora West College Preparatory Academy, Vanguard Classical School, New American School. Parks and trails within 1 mile of 1637 Dallas Street, number 102. Montview Park, Verbena Park, Aurora Park, City Park. Bus routes within 1 mile of 1637 Dallas Street, number 102. Route 15, 15L, 20, 105, 73, 10. If the offender moves from his current address, we will notify the community. This has been a community notification. Informed communities are safer communities.